very, very respectful of people's time. So I want to, before we begin, I wanted to take care of some housekeeping. We will record this program. The recording will be added to our website, but since the University of Maryland website is undergoing major rebuild right now, it might take us a little bit of time. But I'm hoping that you all will give your consent for recording. And Judy, you can start recording now. I would like to also introduce members of the committee, Elsa Alvaro from Northwestern, and I don't know, maybe Elsa, you can like shake your hand or something. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Rachel Minking from Michigan State.
Hi.
And I am from Maryland. Rachel and I will be introducing our speakers today, and Elsa and I will be introducing our speakers tomorrow. I would also like to introduce Lindsay Carpenter, our research education librarian at Maryland, who will be helping us run this program, and especially with the chat, and Judy Kidd from our dean's office, who is recording it right now. We're hoping to end today's session no later than 4:30. Each speaker will have up to 15 minutes total, and with up to 10 minutes of presentation and about 5 minutes of Q&As. The speakers will go in the order of the program that I shared with everyone already. If there is time at the end, we will be able to engage in more conversation. So welcome everyone to the Big Ten Summer Liaison mini conference, our new normal. Thank you all so very much for taking time of your very busy schedules to join us. And I know this semester has been extremely busy for all of us. And I also want to thank all of our speakers for volunteering to share their experiences. In the course of today's and tomorrow's afternoons, we will feature lightning talks from the colleagues from the Big Ten Liaison community. We hope that today and tomorrow will provide a nuanced exploration of the ways COVID-19 has disrupted, challenged, and changed our community and practice. Some of the topics will include conversations with returning to campus, what did COVID teach us, what will stay and what will go, managing new workloads and services, advocacy for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and impact on collections and innovative practices. We hope that through sharing our experiences, we learn from each other and incorporate best practices into our own professional practice, thus advancing our profession. And now, without any further ado, I am giving the mic to Rachel Minking to start the program.
Elena, thank you. All right, we're going to do just quick introductions today. We're going to do more or less name, rank, and serial number, and then we're going to jump right in. So our first speaker today is Brett Cloyd, Social Sciences and Public Policy Librarian at the University of Iowa. And Brett's talk today is figuring out the next steps. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Brett. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. It's good to be here. I was excited to see the
And oops, we have a technical problem.
Oh, can you not hear me?
Okay, yes.
My internet connection is unstable, but I assure you that I am stable today. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll start my prelude again and see how we do together. So these are my slides. I decided to rebrand my talk and call it We're on the Road to Somewhere. You might remember the Talking Heads song, We're on the Road to Nowhere, but that seemed a bit negative to me. So I wanted to think that we're going somewhere together. I think the Big Ten gives us an opportunity to think about being liaisons on our campuses. I've really appreciated the Big Ten convenings that have taken place the last year or two, looking at the big collection. There's some great ideas there. I also happen to be on my campus's staff council, and I've been convening some meetings with Big Ten shared governance groups. So it's been a season of Big Ten. In case you're not familiar with the Talking Head song, there is a line there that is, "The future is certain. Give us time to work it out." So I think this is our time, right, to figure out what we're going to do. Before we proceed or advance too much, let me see, next slide. I want to kind of break this into three parts. I want to talk about the great disruption that's taken place within our institutions and within our libraries and within ourselves, right? Then I want to think about the consultation. For me, meeting with students about research is a really important part of my work. And I wanted to dwell on some of the changes and think about what they might be going forward. And I also want to give us some time to consider camaraderie and rapport and how we work with each other, with our students, with our leaders, and with our communities. So I am going to go here. I grabbed a few screenshots. The Internet Archive was really helpful here. March 17th, 2020 was when our libraries decided that they would close as a result of COVID-19. This was not that surprising, but stunning at the same time. My institution rarely closes for bad weather, right? We would just trot out there, get in our cars or on our buses and be at work on time. So for the University of Iowa to say, we're closed, that's a big thing, right? The Daily Iowa newspaper, that's our student newspaper, this is their March 23rd headline saying, "Go home," right? They're moving to online instruction. My colleague Riley Samuelson is our public health liaison. He put together a coronavirus 2019 live guide because that's what we do, right? We try to collect information sources, share them with our communities. I just have the idea that I want to talk about the Great Disruption. I wasn't familiar with this work from Francis Fukuyama, but one quote that I pulled out of it was that even as the old order has broken apart, a new social order is already taking its place. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, right? We know something big happened, very significant, and we're not putting the pieces back together. We're making something new. And I think that creates a great opportunity for us. I will just mention my other images here. Masks, you might remember in March 2020, public health officials weren't saying we had to wear a mask. It was really unclear. There was talk about there not being enough masks. We didn't have a vaccine at that point, right? So these are some of the issues that were at play and creating uncertainty and worry for a lot of us. So I want to talk a little bit about where the students are and making successful consultations with students. I took pictures. These are actually from a couple weeks ago, but it looks pretty much the same way it did March 2020. On the left, you have some space where we have scheduled consultation appointments. So students would make an appointment with the librarian and we meet them in person together, right? On the right-hand side is our drop-in help. So if you're not sure, you've got a research question, we'll staff that and be there when people have the questions to answer them. We would also do our instant messaging and online chat service here as well. Now note, we have one desk for reserved consultations. I've got 11 colleagues who share the librarian's office on the first floor of our main library. Sometimes we had conflicts, scheduling conflicts, not physical conflicts, but we wanted the space. Our backup plan was to move to our cubicles. There's a lot of us, 10, 11 people having conversations. It wasn't the best atmosphere. And I have appreciated the home office consultation. I've grabbed a quote from March 24, 2020. This was my first consultation that I had with the student, thanking me for my assistance. They're finding them to be helpful. I'll let you know if I have other questions on my research project. Thanks again and be well. Right? So even though it was a very difficult time, the relationship that we have in providing research help, the reassuring voice, the sharing information continued, right? Plus, bonus, I got a window, could put my wife's artwork on the wall. I had my own coffee. I could grab books from my personal library. And that's where I am today, right? I'm able to do this, thankfully, thanks to my supervisor, thanks to my libraries. But we'll see going forward. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour, and I hope you understand. I was going for a walk one day and remembering the telephone, and telephone was considered the center point of reference service for a long time. You know, you needed to have a telephone by the desk so that you could help the people that were going to call you, right? But that has changed. But in 2004, Kathleen Kern says that it's ubiquitous. We need to have the phone really at the center of the work we do. But we're always adapting to new changes. We had our answering machines with the red lit signal. Oh, I always gave me such a strong feeling when I saw the red light. We moved to the online catalog, HTTP, HTML, Z39.50. No fans, it's not a radio station. Mobile devices, RSS, email, Zoom, right? So Kern charged us to think about these things. She said a change in technology necessarily brings with it considerations of the impact on and the potentials for service. Changes in service affect staff and patrons, and they must influence procedure and policy. So I can see I'm going through my time quickly. These are some notes about meeting with students and comparing the situation where we might be next to each other in an in-person situation, whereas we might be looking at each other via Zoom. Students are increasingly working on their own devices. So when they're working on their computer and doing Zoom with me, they can take their own notes, they can do their own searches, they can keep track of their citations. Students have remarked that they really appreciate not having to make an extra trip to the library to get research assistance. And this is beyond the time when we were closed. This is when we're just in the midst of the semester, and students who have busy lives, who have jobs, who have many assignments, moving around can be a challenge. And I would say that for me, students have been really punctual. Our no-shows have declined since the pandemic began. And again, this might be different for you. Maybe you are very reliant on your physical collections and your in-person service, and I don't want to dismiss any of that. I just wanted to say that this is something that I've been experiencing and I've been talking to my colleagues about. I think that we'll be seeing our 2019 residential period will be in dialogue with our present practice. That things have changed, that things have always changed. And I'd like to encourage us to be thoughtful and creative on how we work with students. So I've got just a few thoughts about camaraderie and rapport. I think we need to do a good job of welcoming our new colleagues, or else they won't be colleagues anymore. I think the summer presents a good opportunity to have outings and convenings of new staff. I think we need to figure out ways to think about our social spaces, both online and in person. We must belong. We do belong. We're all here. We're enough. We looked at our strategic plan recently, and I was noticing that we kept including more throughout in terms of metrics. And I would encourage us to think about being more meaningful connections with students in the classroom, with their faculty. I think that will be more satisfying rather than loading on levels of work. I encourage us to celebrate our accomplishments, offer grace, well-being, and resilience while remembering that everybody is an individual with different stresses, that we live in a system that stresses us out. And that, you know, our colleagues that we've worked with for a long time, after 2 years, we've changed, we've grown, we haven't seen each other as much. We might approach our work really differently. And I think that creates some opportunities for, you know, meeting with students who are coming up through online education at school and high school and are transitioning to our universities. And the last piece, I just want to encourage us to craft stories that bring us together. We hold the stories of our institutions, of authors and poets and playwrights and dramatists and musicians. Let's rely on them as we think about what we want to be next. And I think we can do it, right? So these are just a few things that I've found useful. during my time preparing for this talk. Check out David Byrne's Little Creatures album. It's a classic. Kern's piece on the telephone, Fukuyama's Great Disruption. Kevin McClure gave an amazing webinar recently about, education, higher education leadership. Christine Parath has a great book I've been reading, Mastering Civility, a manifesto for the workplace. My colleague Riley and his lab guide, Last Bit, You Belong, a call for connection. You do belong. All of us do. And I think we can do better to be in relationship with each other and to emphasize the things that are really important in an opportunity such as in a pandemic, a crisis, that we can come out better, stronger, and together. All right, that's my talk. I will stop sharing. I really, if people are interested in the things I've talked about, would like to catch up sometime in the future, I welcome connection, email, Zoom, if we want to get some small groups, or if you think I'm just, totally out there and ready for the next show, that's understandable too.
Brett, thank you so much. Round of applause for Brett. And
Thanks.
the camera on Zoom, you can't necessarily see, but people are clapping. And I see there are, so there's a chat in there. Also, most of the calls on our desk and office phones are about our electric bill or our car's extended warranty. Anyone have employees forgoing office phones? And it seems that at Minnesota, some people have gotten rid of their office phones.
Yeah, we did too.
Did you?
Skype. It's all on the computer.
Yeah, right. It's all on the computer. True. Other questions for Brett?
So I don't see any questions,
Mhm.
but those are really good comments. There is more at Matt. Thank you for this presentation. Absolutely love your what holds us together slide. Yes, to belonging, to offering grace. Well said.
Yeah, and these are all things that we can do. What about your desks out there? Is anybody, are you going back to 2019? Or are you making big changes, or are you just sort of plodding along?
Well, we haven't had librarians sitting at the desk for many years already. So we kind of probably in some in a different, a little bit different from others, but our staff is serving at the services desk.
It's amazing how telephone has that word resonated. There's like a generational thing, maybe a little bit about that too, but there's some clear like phone.
Ah.
So it looks like a lot of places don't have librarians at the reference desk anymore, and there's some concern on some people's part for giving patrons they're forced to give their cell phones, and that's problematic. I'm not sure how to get around that problem. We still have our phones in our offices, and they're connected to our computers as well.
Yeah, I know some people have Skype on their phones and then they can turn it on or off when they're not working, but it's a tough call.
There's a question from Deborah. Are there elements of the online research consultation that are very different from in-person? You mentioned that students can do their own searching, and what techniques have been working well?
Yeah, I think part of it, especially early on, that people really hungered and appreciated having conversation. And so that helped develop the talk about research projects and questions. I think more recently, I've just been creating like little notes for myself about links to databases and sources I might find before we meet, and then using that as a launching point when we're together on Zoom. And then I can send it to them afterwards so they can get to the material easily.
And lots of good notes in there, but we are going to move on. It is time. So again,
you.
Brett, thank you. And we're going to shift gears. This time we are calling upon our colleague, Lindsay Carpenter, who's the pedagogy librarian at the University of Maryland. So she's like just down the street, like practically from Yelena and Judy and all of them. And she's helping out too. She's doing all the things. So Lindsay is going to talk to us today about Keep Teaching, leveraging disruption as a catalyst for change. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. I also created this presentation with my colleague, Rachel Gammons, who couldn't be here today, but just wanted to make sure I noted her contributions. So yes, I'm the pedagogy librarian here at the University of Maryland and research education program lead. And I work within teaching and learning services, which helps coordinate instruction for the libraries. So prior to COVID, we had 4 primary arms of our teaching program. The first is the library's overall instruction, which is led by our subject librarians and our teaching and learning librarians. This has taken place primarily in person and serves around 20,000 students each academic year. To support that program, we offer the Fearless Teaching Institute, which is an in-house professional development program focused on strengthening the teaching and assessment skills of library teachers. That program has relied heavily on in-person events such as workshops prior to COVID. Within the library's overall teaching program, our unit, Teaching and Learning Services, manages the general education instruction. We're fortunate to be embedded in the syllabus for English 101, and we lead between 240 to 280 in-person information literacy sessions for that course alone. To support our ability to teach on that scale, we developed and oversee the Research and Teaching Fellowship, which is a 3-semester teacher training program for MLIS students who teach the bulk of those English 101 sessions. During COVID, although we shifted online, we continued to offer a large and varied instruction program. Although our number of students has decreased in some disciplines during COVID-19, in other disciplines, the online format elicited increased requests for instruction. Before COVID, the Fearless Teaching Institute had a small but loyal contingent of participants, many of whom are on the call. But over the summer of 2020, when we redesigned the program and its offerings to take place online, we saw participation dramatically increase. This is something that we hadn't even considered exploring prior to COVID, but we've continued now that we are able to work safely in person because of the response that we saw to virtual programming. In teaching and learning services, we had expected to scale back our teaching for English 101 during our virtual instruction period, but we were actually surprised to see that the program has continued to ask us for synchronous sessions to all sections of English 101. In fall 2020, we taught about 140 synchronous sessions using Zoom. We continued around that same number when we moved to hybrid teaching in spring 2021. And now that we've returned to in-person instruction, we're seeing it at our pre-COVID levels. When English 101 moved online in 2020, we also moved the Research and Teaching Fellowship online. Although this online format has required more intentionality in our programming and engagement, building an online community was not that different from what we were expecting to do in person. We have, though, resumed primarily in-person activities as soon as it was safe to do so, because even though we were able to replicate a lot of things in the virtual environment, we found that the energy of being together in person was beneficial for all of us. So I'm going to talk about in a little more detail 3 of the arms of our teaching and what that looked like when we transitioned to online work. So as I mentioned before, prior to COVID-19, the Fearless Teaching Institute was an entirely in-person program. The transition to online learning reduced some barriers to participation and increased opportunities for staff from across the libraries to attend. Pre-pandemic, from 2018 to March 2020, the Fearless Teaching Institute hosted approximately 15 events. But after this online relaunch from March 2020 to May 2021, we hosted more than 50 events with a combined attendance of more than 400 library faculty, staff, and student workers. Much of the increase was due to the shift in the modality of instruction, But we also benefited from streamlining our online registration process and diversifying our programming. The Fearless Teaching Institute also now offers a greater variety of events, ranging from hour-long teaching workshops to shorter informal conversations over lunch that we call Test It Out Tuesdays. We also have monthly conversations about recently published literature in the field through our journal club. After the return to in-person teaching in spring of 2021, the Fearless Teaching Institute hosted events that focused on transitioning to hybrid instruction and navigating the challenges of our new campus climate. The revamped Fearless Teaching Institute is now an agile and important arm of the UMD Library's teaching program. In program evaluation forms, participants have highlighted the ease of registration and attendance, the variety of sessions, the relevance of programming to their immediate needs and situation, and the supportive atmosphere provided by instructors. One participant noted, "The Fearless Teaching Institute saved me when I had to create several videos in early April 2020 without much time to prepare. I'm so thankful to have learned the skills to be able to teach online on my own." We also moved the Research and Teaching Fellowship online. So we had to adjust how we offer curricular and job seeking support to those students, as well as to how we created community. We prepare fellows for information literacy instruction through a series of observations, co-teaching, and engagement with pedagogical theory and credit-bearing courses. During the summer of 2020, the credit-bearing courses were redesigned to include the theory and practice of online instruction. Content for the fall 2020 semester included facilitating online group work, developing asynchronous learning materials, and conducting assessment in the online classroom. In spring 2020, graduating fellows faced a particularly challenging job market. Hiring freezes, budget reductions, and a new normal of remote interviews resulted in a competitive job search process that was especially demanding for applicants. The volatility of the job market also disrupted the search timeline. Rather than job hunting in the spring semester, fellows continued their search through the summer and fall. The extended timeline increased their need for support, including a greater demand for reference letters, application review, mentorship, and job coaching. To prepare for video interviews, fellows participated in mock interviews and job presentations on Zoom. As the pandemic progressed and employers increasingly requested that applicants demonstrate efficacy as online instructors, we worked with fellows to develop sample lesson plans and review digital learning objects for their interviews. Each year in the fellowship, we conduct focus groups to get feedback about what was the most important part of the fellowship. And consistently, fellows identify the sense of community as the single greatest benefit. Continuing to foster a collaborative, supportive environment became even more important as fellows contended with the professional and personal impacts of the pandemic. Many staples of the program, such as in-person office hours and professional development workshops, moved to synchronous online platforms. We also fostered a sense of community through informal social Zoom sessions and weekly overlapping online office hours. In lieu of an in-person graduation ceremony in spring 2020, the team compiled a video that featured congratulations, encouragement, and advice from librarians and former fellows. We also tapped into our alumni network in other ways too. To increase opportunities for community, we launched a formal alumni network to better connect current and former fellows. The network includes regular communications, such as a biannual newsletter, which highlights professional achievements of current and former fellows, as well as an email list to share job advertisements, research and professional opportunities, and just general support. Alumni also offered online mentorship and served as guest instructors in our credit-bearing courses, which enabled current fellows to benefit from the professional expertise of alumni while expanding their professional networks. And then finally, managing the transition to our online instruction for English 101 required a lot of work from a lot of different people. So to manage all of this, Rachel Gammons, who's the head of teaching and learning services here, created an English 101 information literacy steering committee. The steering committee met monthly throughout the summer and included stakeholders from the libraries, the academic writing program, and the research and teaching fellowship. We typically schedule English 101 information literacy sessions somewhere between the 2nd and 6th week of the semester. But to accommodate the additional training that we needed for online teaching, we delayed the start of our fall 2020 teaching by about 2 weeks, and also instituted a co-instructor model with 2 library instructors per instruction session. The primary instructor led the class, and the support instructor monitored the chat, visited breakout rooms, and responded to any technical challenges. Support instructors were included until the lead instructor felt confident teaching independently while also managing the technical side of things. We also changed our scheduling process. Previously, we had one person in teaching and learning services do all of the scheduling, and then individual instructors would claim individual sessions. In the new online environment, instead, we partnered library instructors with a specific English 101 instructor, and those two worked directly with each other to schedule and deliver library sessions for each section. The new process represented a substantial increase in responsibility for the research and teaching fellows, who served as the single point of contact between the course teacher and the libraries. So to try to reduce some of that burden, we developed extensive protocols and email templates to guide communication between the two groups of instructors. Because we're part of the standard syllabus for English 101, we in TLS also have a standard lesson plan. In order to adapt to this online environment, we partnered with faculty members in English 101 through that steering committee to identify online tools to adapt our activities to the Zoom classroom, including Padlet, Mentimeter, and Breakout Rooms. To supplement the synchronous instruction that we were doing for English 101, we also created a Canvas module and the Get It Done guide to undergraduate research, both of which featured video tutorials and information on troubleshooting, digital access, and connecting with a librarian remotely. That is all I have. I'm so sorry. I think I ran out of time, but luckily that was my last piece. So I'm happy to answer questions if we have any time.
Lindsay, thank you. And you were not at it. You were like just at time. Timed it perfect. But yes, open it for questions. I can't believe all the work that you went in to put into all of that to capture, one, to capture the data, and two, to shift all of that instruction around and put that on for your fellows. Your fellows are probably very thankful for that experience as well. Oh, and I do see a question. How many research and teaching fellows do you have at a time? And is that tied to a class?
Yes, great question. So in the fall semester, we only have one cohort working for us, and a cohort is usually made up of 6 students. And then in the spring, we have that current cohort who are our seniors, and we hire a new batch of junior fellows. So we have somewhere between 10 and 12 in the spring semesters. They're all graduate students in library and information science. And when they're admitted into the fellowship, they sign up for a 1-credit class for the remaining 3 semesters of their time at Maryland, so that we have at least one set time that we can meet each week to go over prep work for online or in-person instruction.
And I also would like to add that we have about 100% placement of the students after they graduate and done with us.
Yes, so we pay fellows an hourly rate. So right now we pay them $15 an hour. We're going to request to increase that. But they get paid for the teaching they do, their office hours, any prep work, any responding to faculty or student reference requests. And then, oh, I see more questions coming in. Do fellows do work for the other libraries? Yes, in their final semester, they do a field study project with us where they continue doing the work of their fellowship, but they're also partnered with another subject librarian to work on some sort of other information literacy experience. It doesn't have to be a class. Sometimes it's creating an online learning object or helping develop an assessment tool. Let's see.
There is a question about how does teaching the MLIS to teach the English 101 course work?
Do I have time? So
You have like a minute. And the other question, and can you graduate more fellows with an interest in STEM libraries? Smiley face.
we do try to push STEM, I have to say. We've been trying to push that harder recently. For your other question, we've written an article about it, so I'm going to grab the citation and I'll just put it into the chat.
Thank you. And one last round of applause for Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Lindsay, and thank you for your help in the background as well. And we are going to keep going on our tour here. Whoops, let me get back to the right place. Here we go. Our next colleague is our very own Laura Welsby, who's from here at Michigan State University. She's director of the Guest Business Library. And Laura is going to bring for us today the top 10 plus books for liaison librarians. And Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Can everybody see my screen? Okay. Let me get it in a mode where hopefully you can see my title slide. Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you, Rachel. It's great to be here today and to hear the presentations already. I've taken lots of notes already and lots of ideas, right? Implementation. We'll talk, Rachel. But I am Laura Welsby. I'm the director of the Guest Business Library at Michigan State University. And I've been in this role for about, I think, 14 or 15 years. So throughout the course of my time here at MSU, I've actually trained and onboarded a number of newer librarians into the role of business reference librarian. And I'm also kind of interested in personally doing a little research project on how the role of liaison librarian, specifically business librarian, has evolved over time and what are the new requirements. So I've kind of developed a kind of a core reading list, although it was hard to pick, just 10. And there are a lot of other areas that I could pick 10 more, right? So I'm using this kind of as just a discussion piece or a thought piece to solicit more feedback from everyone else around kind of training materials for liaison librarians and trying to come up with a core corpus maybe around this concept. So a la BuzzFeed, I tried to do a listicle here. So see how it goes. But also I do want to have the one or mention the one thing that I did not do is there's a lot about instruction already out there, right? And I think instruction is a key component of liaison librarianship, but I think other people have kind of addressed that, and there's a lot of literature around that already. Not to say that it's not important. Same can be said for some other things. Instruction in particular is the one that stands out to me. So it's not meant to be a comprehensive list. It's meant to, again, be a kind of a discussion piece around the idea of what skills or information or theoretical frameworks do new people need when they get into a liaison role, because it is different than some other roles. And so I consider, my journey through business librarianship has been long and windy, and I kind of think all of ours are, but these are some of the things I've read along the way that have helped me and helped me help others. So I tried to group these into broad categories. The first is kind of general approaches to librarianship. And I've mentioned 2 titles here. But if you have worked for me in any capacity before, you know about this book, because this is what I reference heavily all the time. And it's The Embedded Librarian by David Schumacher, who is, I believe, he may have retired recently, but he was at Catholic University as an instructor and librarian. And this model of our approach to our work as liaisons is kind of what I try to reinforce with the people that I'm training, right? Moving from what can be considered a traditional mode where it's transactional or generic separate and apart to this more engaged, specialized type model where relationships are really important, communication. And so I often talk about this with newer folks that I'm training, but also the other people that I talk with about this model is faculty and sometimes students, but mostly faculty administrators. I'll often raise this slide, this exact slide almost, and say, this is what we're trying to do, because a lot of times they're still thinking of us in a transactional, books only, and it's a way to explain visually what we're trying to do. So, so that's my first book, Embedded Librarianship. And the other quote I often use in conjunction with this is this famous, I find it famous quote from Jessamine West in a book, The Atlas of New Librarianship, which is actually not on my list, but it's David Lankus. And when people have an information need, they'll always ask people they know before they ask a librarian. The trick is making sure that librarians are some of the people they know. So I bring this up because the other book around kind of theoretical models of librarianship that I like to promote and explore and recommend is this basically anything by our David Lankus. But this one, to me, is more approachable than the Atlas of New Librarianship, which is an interesting format to me and sometimes hard to follow. But he talks about librarians as facilitators, and specifically about the need that society needs better libraries. Libraries should be a community platform for knowledge creation and sharing. And he sees librarians as facilitators by both providing access, not just to stuff, but to intelligence, almost, to the skills and tools and knowledge of liaison librarians. They provide training, safe spaces, and this is what I think I'm put on this planet to do: help people learn to learn, right? And want to learn, be curious. So, so these are kind of the philosophical or orientation type books that I recommend people, like, okay, if you're wondering where I'm going in a certain situation or what I think we should be doing, they're probably in one of these two books, the approach. And then my next couple of books are about organizations more broadly, not just libraries, but what is it like working in a large sometimes organization that can be bureaucratic, can be a lot of red tape. And this is a classic book, Leading Change by John Potter, and it's been updated, and it's not earth-shattering, but it provides a framework for how to be kind of a change advocate, or how an organization can transform from within. And for me, it was helpful because I had a framework. We're always talking about change or innovation or whatever, but how do you actually do the work, right? And the thing that's interesting to me is the first 4 or 5 steps are about communication and getting buy-in and that kind of stuff. And I think it's a good model because as liaisons, we're often change agents within the organization. We're often on the front line with the users. We know how their preferences are changing, and the processes that have been developed previously within the library don't meet the need, right? So how do this talks about organizations and transforming organizations and how to do that. And a lot of it is about communication. There is a free and updated version available online that takes into account the implications of organizational change based on everything we've been dealing with around COVID. So that's the link to it. It's a shortened, condensed version of the framework, and it's a nice handout. A lot of these things too are, you can take a chapter from them or read a section and use it for a training exercise, right? Or a workshop or whatever. So then the next one is perhaps my favorite. And it's called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And it's kind of a cult classic in business now, but it refers to, the need. It was written by the creative, Gordon McKenzie is the creative director at Hallmark, or he was for 30 years. And so he had to deal with this bureaucracy of Hallmark while also maintaining a creative side and, inspiration for the people who were making the cards and coming up with the text and whatnot. And so he talks about the hairball as a tangled, impenetrable mass of rules and traditions, and how, you kind of have to deal with that, but also just talks about creativity and how to foster creativity and awaken or renew creativity and new ideas in an organization. And it's a very approachable book. It's short. There's lots of pictures. Here's the table of contents. Doesn't follow the traditional, outline. So again, it's you can read it in like an hour, and it's a great book to generate further discussion around creativity. All right, the next couple are kind of practical tips. So how do you actually do the work? And one of the things I think I know I needed training on, and I think a lot of liaisons do, is communicating value and thinking about how you bring value. You can call it customers. Some people don't like that terminology, but to your patrons or to the faculty and staff and students that you're working with. What do they need, and how can you deliver it? What are the gaps? And this is, again, a framework for helping you think through that process. And then at the end, come up with basically a pitch or a product that meets the need. Again, very approachable book, a lot of graphs and charts, but it spells out the process so that anybody can follow along. Again, another great group exercise. And then a couple
Laura,
of.
I'm so sorry we're getting at time.
Okay, I'll just real quickly. These are practical tips on data, how to get things done, website usability, and then one of my favorite ones is the Subject Liaison Survival Guide to Technical Services. I wish I would have had that 20 years ago. And then last but not least, one of my favorites is the 4 agreements. I think it helps us, if we could all live, me in particular, by these principles all the time, it would alleviate a lot of stress and misunderstanding. So that's my list. Thanks, everyone.
Laura, thank you. Folks, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Well, can I just say before, especially like presentation like that, I would like to gather all of the slides from everybody so we can post them, because this is something that would be helpful to people in the future, and taking notes, it's a little bit hard, especially as we go so fast. So, Laura, I hope you will send us this.
More than happy to do that.
And
also,
it goes to everybody who has slides.
I'm also collecting titles from others already. So Brett has mentioned a book about civility, so that will go on the list as well.
Laura's in librarian mode. You're getting lots of little comments over here on the side. They're loving this list. They love Orbiting the Giant Hairball, best business book ever. It's out there. Folks, Laura's not making this up. It's co-signed. But I want to make sure, do we have questions? Questions for Laura?
No, but there is a lot of thank yous and a great choice of books.
She hit a nerve with us. All right, well, not hearing questions, and we're going to keep going here. Moving on our journey. Our next librarian, our next colleague who's up is Jordan Sly, Research and Instruction Librarian at the University of Maryland, College Park. And Jordan's going to speak to us today about, did the pandemic alter faculty expectations on library instruction? Thank you so much, Jordan.
Great, thank you. I might bleed ever so slightly into my question time, so just as a fair warning, I suppose, but I'll try not to. The animating question for this talk comes from my own experience with library instruction during the pandemic. And like most of us, I've learned and relearned values and methods of instruction, moving from the standards to the framework determinations of information literate students and all of this kind of stuff over the past sort of decade or so. And generally, faculty expectations over this period also have grown to embrace these new formulations and practices. And most faculty have come to expect, the more robust forms of information literacy education in addition to sort of standard bibliographic instruction. As the pandemic hit and the necessity of online instruction became the norm, though, it was my general observation that in the transition, the desire for these more robust forms of information literacy shrunk and a more practical and immediate need filled its place. Thankfully, I think this short talk will help to demonstrate that this was not necessarily a widespread observation, which is what I had assumed when I put the talk together. And hopefully some of the general themes developed through the focus group that I put together can help us all recenter and refocus our instruction for the post-pandemic instruction environment. I'm extraordinarily thankful to my colleagues who agreed to help with this. I'm keeping them anonymous for the talk, but thank you very much. You know who you are. And I appreciate your help, of course. Okay. I structured the questions for this focus group to move from the pre-pandemic time to the sort of, I guess, post-pandemic or to now, however you want to phrase it. And the questions sought sort of observations, practices, and methods from each of these stages. I did this in two ways. I created a Google form for those who couldn't join in person or in the Zoom environment, couldn't join in the discussion, and then held a discussion group session with a number of others. So overall, I had 2 people use the form and 6 in a focus group, so 8 people altogether. So this isn't, sort of a representative sample or anything like that. It's just simply, an illustration of some experiences. Okay. The first question sought to understand the group's teaching philosophy and goals that they had in instruction back in the pre-pandemic classroom. So the responses in this area focused around 4 particular areas. 1 were dispositional skills, which is where they wanted students to focus on the ability to search and demonstrate learning through active learning methods. The responses also included things about attitudinal skills, getting students towards shifting to a position of using the library first or thinking of the library as a valuable information starting place. Additionally, there was a lot of discussion about contextual skills. This is focusing on the individual needs of the students and their assignments and things, and almost more importantly, a direct focus on the specific and idiosyncratic elements of specific libraries. In other words, focusing on branch library needs and the sort of individual needs of the students who use those libraries, that sort of a thing. So separating those out from the others, from the main library. There was also a real focus on active and participatory learning, group learning and engagement, this sort of a thing. And specifically, there were multiple notes about the importance of having students, quote, drive. In other words, letting them lead the way in the searching, having them actually step up to the podium or whatever is in the classroom to use the computer and kind of direct how the things are going to go. This is something that wouldn't translate very easily into the online environment. And as we'll see in the next question, the issues of engagement were somewhat common, problems in getting students engaged in the pandemic environment. Oh, I meant to show this screen that whole time. This is just all what these slides are just essentially what the focus groups look like. These are my notes, more or less. So it's not really even that important, but I'll try to remember to keep switching to it. Question 2 sought to look at the early stages of the pandemic and their reflections and observations from that time. So right at the sort of early days, right when things were first shutting down, that sort of a thing. And generally the respondents' observations centered around a couple of core ideas. Primarily, most found that the instruction landscape felt quite a bit different, obviously setting aside the nature of the Zoom environments and things like that, but mostly because faculty members that they were working with were having a great deal of difficulty adjusting to online instruction. And as one respondent noted, there was a feeling that the faculty didn't know what to do with the librarians, didn't sort of know what they wanted from them in the new environment. And there was a sense in this discussion that because of our colleagues in teaching and learning services, which is the internal group that Lindsay was talking about, and the Fearless Teaching Institute and all of this that they helped us with, that we were, as librarians, are probably better equipped to handle the transition. And we were much more comfortable in the new environments. One respondent noted that she spent a good amount of time preparing and learning Zoom and other conference software to be, quote, ahead of the learning process and to help faculty and lead the workshops confidently. This was a shared sentiment that it was so important to kind of learn the new tools and to be quickly and competently able to move into this new environment and to kind of regain some of our instructional integrity in the classroom, to kind of be the expert in the room, even when the teaching faculty member wasn't quite sure what to do. This was coupled with, however, with a sort of decrease in the amount of instruction requests, or at least a sort of slowing, or not, big gains or anything like this, but an increase in research consultations. So one-to-one research consultations, what they'll talk about more in the next question. And most importantly, the nature of the questions and the sort of focus of a lot of these sessions tended to shift from these sort of more robust ideas, but to sort of access questions, how do people find things? This becomes a kind of a big theme in the next question here. So in question 3, I sought to understand how the respondents adapted to the height of the pandemic, essentially when it was pretty certain that we weren't going to be heading back to the classroom, in the near future, and sort of this was the new normal for a while. There were 4 clear themes developed in this conversation. There was a sense of deepening of one-to-one research consultations, meaning that they become more like tutoring sessions and longer form with more questions involved, that sort of a thing. This also became more personal. And there was some notes of a greater chance to connect with faculty to discuss the goals for instruction sessions and things like this, given the Zoom environment, easier to just kind of call and check in. Librarians also felt that there was a more directed and purposeful mission with instruction and less of a general need for kind of general introductions and things like that. A better sense to get in and dive in more directly to the content. Interestingly, many felt that or at least a couple felt that the Zoom environments allowed a somewhat more personal connection with students as they had a window into our lives and vice versa, pets, families, etc. We could see when they were driving to the beach was one example, or if they were at home with family, or all these sorts of things, across the world. And it was interesting too, at the same time, there was a note that this kind of more intimate connection with the students led to some dislocation and feeling distance from their colleagues. So it kind of an interesting note there. The focus on instruction too changed. As we couldn't focus solely on library resources, we had to focus a lot on sort of information more broadly and looking at a lot of free internet tools, things like that. So the kind of nature of what we were looking at shifted slightly, especially if you consider that earlier answer about the earlier focus on library specific things. Now we're looking at a broader set of things, which we've always done, of course, but more focus on stuff, getting things. This, of course, coupled with the idea of focus on access. A lot of people talked about how they had to build into their libguides and various different instruction formats, notions about restrictions and access, if we had curbside, all of that kind of thing. It's also clear that the focus on the method of communication and an awareness of learning differences was also very important to us. This comes again from our fearless teaching colleagues as well, as there was a lot of trying to really tailor towards getting around issues of Zoom fatigue, differential learners, and looking at the online environment as its own space and tool. Okay. Question 4 looked at the idea of adapting tools and strategies to see if there were any generalizable observations from this period that we could, kind of take into the next area. Or if there's anything that we sort of garnered from this. And the responses were a little more muted in this section, primarily because I think a lot of the discussion happened in the previous question. But the general consensus revolved around the notions that the rates and frequency of instruction were not dramatically hindered from what had been in the pre-pandemic or the pre-pandemic normal. But the needs still revolved around these issues of access. And that was a sort of lingering issue that was both important, but something that was difficult to deal with. Multiple respondents noticed that they were incorporating far more non-library resources like Internet Archive, Google Books, etc. And additionally, a major thread of this conversation was regarding the uptick in questions about citation. Many students were very unclear about the general notions of citation and writing, and also were having trouble citing this sort of new formats that were being incorporated, digital formats and other non-typical materials. And it was clear in the written responses as well that there was a need to simplify and to really distill instruction to a far narrower set of skills. So again, kind of digging straight in to the core of the lesson. And for some, this carried over into the research consultations as well, which again became more like tutoring sessions for many of us. For question 5, which is the final question, I wanted to know if there were any lessons, skills, or instructional dispositions that the discussants have or will have now or will bring outside of the online environment and back into the physical classroom, sort of, bringing it full circle a bit. And the discussion focused on a couple of key ideas, which is the continuation of highlighting remote access and the discussion of non-library internet sources for these things and the real incorporation of that into their lessons and putting that into the sort of larger internet landscape or information landscape for the students. And importantly, this was noted and discussed at some length, a sort of doubling down on the core tenets of information literacy, specifically as one respondent discussed in the sort of in and around this increasingly common understanding of sort of mis and disinformation and the general adversarial information landscape that we all exist in now. And this included some sort of practical advice with this, including wanting students understand the sort of information and publishing landscape, including things like sending them to things like Retraction Watch and other sort of watchdog type things to note how information is being sort of discussed and disseminated and all. Through this discussion, it's clear that many of the librarians felt that the pandemic allowed them an opportunity to refocus and hone their lessons into a tighter and more direct package. Faculty members were better able to coordinate and explain their goals to the teaching faculty, were better able to coordinate and explain their goals and hopes for the sessions. And librarians were then able to better address specific ideas and the needs of their students and faculty, and thereby increasing the impact of their instruction. So while there are many challenges in the early phases, the librarians were, I'd say, perhaps better equipped than many of the teaching faculty to really learn the skills necessary, not only to sort of stay afloat in the new environment, but to really take sail and thrive despite the adversity. I was heartened to learn this from my colleagues, as this provides us all an opportunity to take these lessons learned and pivot and remarket ourselves and our services for the fall. This narrower but deeper understanding of the direct needs of faculty and students provide us with a way to market our impact and to garner further buy-in for the future and allow us to better find the footing in developing a coherent and scaffolded program as we regroup and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan.
What do I do on time?
You're a little bit over. Yeah, but he warned us. He warned us, Elena.
Yes, he warned us.
It's okay. We're just going to take it out of your question time, Jordan. We got our ways here. Questions for our colleague. That was a lot of data you collected. And a lot of assessing on that data. I like the color coding too. And I actually appreciated the color coding as somebody who's more of a visual. If you were to just shove like a transcript at me, I would have been like, but I appreciated your key with the color coding because I was actually able to follow along, and I thought it was interesting to see what that change was through those questions. And so it was good. I appreciated that format. Questions. Dazzled them. Dazzled. All right, moving on.
Put them to sleep. That's the other way.
No, they don't sleep. See them.
All right. Thank you all.
Jordan, thank you so much. And we're going to keep going here. Next on our list, whoops, as I close my screen. Next on our list is Nancy O'Brien, Head of Social Sciences, Health and Education Library at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Collections and Nostalgia, Opportunities to Engage Donors. And Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the same sorts of things in terms of opportunities that came up with the pandemic as we changed over to more online meetings and webinars. Our advancement office at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign reached out to a number of the subject or liaison librarians and asked if they would do 1-hour Zoom meetings or presentations, I should say, for donors, for library friends, and they did open it up to a broader audience than that. So I'm going to talk about engagement with donors rather than with students. And this is actually just what I said. So I'm going to move on a little bit here. Let me adjust my screen for myself. So in September 2021, I was asked as not just the education librarian, which is my liaison area, but also the individual who works with our children's and young adult literature collection and our school book collection, which we call the curriculum collection of teaching materials for K through 12. I was asked to talk a little bit about something within the library that I work in. And I thought I would use the nostalgia that people have attached to children's books to focus on that. And the talk was entitled Little Golden Books and Beyond, the Children's Books in the University Library. And I started out by explaining why academic libraries actually have children's book collections, because we are working with the students who are in the teacher education programs and the library and information science programs who are focusing on youth services. So once we kind of got past that, I went through my presentation, and I am going to share some of the slides from that with you. But I also included a little bit shamelessly throughout the talk a request for donations, or that we were a place where people could consider donating materials. So this was really great. And I have to say, my latest contact from that September presentation was last month in late April. So I am still hearing from people who say, oh, I found something that, you know, is my mother's or grandparents' school book or childhood favorite. Would you be interested? We received over 500 unique items through that particular presentation. That was certainly not the intent of the advancement office. They just wanted to highlight collections, but I used it as a way to kind of garner some other opportunities. It really was a winning situation for everyone. Typically, the donations were preceded by either a conversation through email or by phone. We still do use phones here, although of course they're all IP related, but we do have phones, and that was particularly helpful, I think, with some of the older donors, just as it is with the community members that we get calls from sometimes. As part of that, we requested if they could provide a list or a description of the content that they were considering donating. And I also was very clear about what would happen to any duplicates that we received and what our disposal policies are, also with damaged books and other materials. And because so many people have fond memories of their childhood favorite books, this was really perceived as being particularly valuable to donors who had not previously considered in-kind donations, but now realized there was an opportunity to find a home for their treasured books, where they would also be retained and preserved. And the statistics here are 796 books were offered. We added 530, and most of those dated from the 1800s to 2021, but I would say the majority were in the early to mid 20th century. So we'll start seeing a little bit more in terms of images here. So we call our children's literature collection the school collection, or S collection, and that is only the component that has children's and young adult books. It's been around since the 1940s. There was actually a core collection before that that was from the earlier part of the 20th century. It is currently about 184,000 books. We add between 2,500 to 4,000 new books each year, typically through purchase. We did get a huge influx in the 1990s when we took on the 58,000 book collection from the Center for Research Libraries in Chicago. So that really boosted our collection quite a bit at that point. In-kind donations are steady, but they really are a very small part of what we get. And I'm talking not just based on the presentation, but the typical calls I get from faculty, especially teaching faculty who have taught children's literature and so on. Just a little bit of background information. Our collection dates back to 1800 for children's literature, and we have 2022 publications right now in our collection. They're in 3 locations: the Social Sciences, Health, and Education Library, where I'm currently working. The older books that are pre-1946 are housed in our rare book locations, which is also where we keep our pop-up books for preservation reasons. And then the books that either don't circulate frequently or are older are kept in our high density storage facility, and we're able to get those back usually in about 24 hours. So that's very useful for the students who need books, and they might have already been moved to a less visible location. So because the program was really titled about little golden books, we did get quite a few of those, unique ones that we had not previously owned. One of them came with the original dust jacket, and if you don't know, I didn't know for a number of years, the very, very early 1940s little golden books were issued with dust jackets. So that's kind of a unusual sort of thing to get. We did get an advertising book from Coca-Cola. It was a pop-up book with a Christmas theme, so that was fun. And we did get 2 other pop-up books. We had multiple offers for books by a regional author. He died, I believe, in the late 1930s, but he wrote the Raggedy Ann and Andy books. And so we accepted unique editions of that, of his body of work. And then I mentioned we do have a teaching materials collection. So we actually got some workbooks for the Dick and Jane readers, which are rather hard to come by. So that was kind of fun too. This is just in keeping with the advertising type material. So here we have something from our collection called the Cheerios Counting Book. I would say our collection is actually one that is more valuable for the breadth of the material. Unlike some of the other major children's literature collections around the US, we don't focus on a particular set of manuscripts from authors or illustrations from particular individuals. We have a very broad range. We do acquire the high quality, highly recommended, and also award-winning books. But we also have some of the other books that maybe are questionable, or certainly do not meet today's standards for being sensitive to different populations. But again, that's the kind of material that is very useful for researchers from our historical collection. And those researchers are often looking to see what kind of messages children were being given through printed books. The little golden books were definitely the draw for the presentation. We had 178 registered attendees. I know not that many attended, but several said they went and looked at it later. So that was the big kind of hook to get people attending this or interested. And the little golden books, if you're not that familiar with them, were popular, remain popular because they're very affordable. But the early ones in particular were illustrated by well-known or very talented artists who came from the Disney studios, for example, or some major artists from Eastern Europe who came to the US as refugees from the Second World War. And then, as I mentioned before, those early books, and you can see here, the one on the right is a dust-jacketed book. The one on the left is a library binding book. So just one of the types of things that we have. Another popular part of the donors' collections they wanted to offer were series books. And series books were not held in the highest esteem by teachers and librarians, some teachers and librarians in the early to mid 20th century, because they were not classic literature. And some people felt that children should be learning through classic literature. And today's approach to to reading is more get them reading, and they will continue on to other levels. But, you know, whether they're reading graphic novels or comics, getting them reading is the important thing. So the interest is important. Our collection does include a lot of older series like Nancy Drew and Judy Bolton, Tom Swift, Hardy Boys, and so on. But we also have a lot of the current popular series as well. And the donations we received included some of the updated Nancy Drews, as well as a lot of Sweet Valley High books that we did not previously have. So we were able to add unique material to our collection through this program. The current focus of the collection, and I say current, but it has been true for at least 30 or more years here, because that's what the teaching faculty are interested in, is diverse. There is a real focus on having diversity of any type included in the collection for children's literature. And so you'll see this is an example of a recent publication that's in our collection. The donations were not as diverse because of the time period of the publications. And in fact, some were not particularly sympathetic. But again, we are a research collection, so that is important to us to have the wide range of materials. We did have one donor who not only donated some books from her personal collection, which related to Hawaii because she spent part of her childhood there and had a lot of ties to Hawaii. She also ordered new books, new publications from historical associations and museums that had a Hawaii theme. So that was pretty exciting too.
Nancy, I have to stop you. You're at time, my friend.
Thanks. Can I just go on for to my final slide?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please.
So actually I'm having problems getting past this slide for some reason. I am not sure why. Let me see if I can move. Oh, there we go. Dick and Jane, multicultural editions. And basically, I just wanted to say that the program offered a lot of opportunities for donors to connect to the library. And this was my final slide for that presentation, which provided any of the attendees with my contact information, some ideas of the sorts of things that we would like to add, and an image of an item. So we had great response, and I think the webinars for donors, friends, and so on would be a good way to engage some of the alumni from our institutions. So thank you.
Nancy, thank you. And I do see a question in the chat for you. Judy Markowitz would like to know if those books can be circulated.
Yes, although if they are in our rare book location, which is the pre-1946, those do not circulate. And that was a preservation issue.
And I do see a lot of comments about folks who have these materials at home or remember them, or a lot of fondness, it seems, coming out. Yeah.
So and I have a question too, even as a co-host. So are these books only in English, or there are any other languages that represented in that collection?
Most of the books we had donated were in English, but our collection includes a variety of languages. Not a lot of indigenous languages from North America, but we have Arabic, Chinese, most Western European language, a lot of Spanish bilingual books, and so on. So we work with our area studies librarians, and they often will help us get children's books in other languages.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nancy, so much for this. Yeah, so and the comments keep coming here. So follow down in the chat, Nancy. There's so much going on. But we are going to switch gears yet again, and Yelena and I are going to switch places as well. She's going to take over the introductions.
Yeah, so our next speaker is Carolyn Bishop, physics, astronomy, and earth sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And her presentation is STEM librarian meetups during COVID. Okay, Carolyn.
Boom, did I do it?
Yeah, we see it.
Now is it like a black screen that says STEM librarian meetups during
Yes.
COVID? Great. All right, let me get my notes up. I'm joined by Megan Lafferty, who is my colleague at the University of Minnesota. I'll let Megan introduce herself. My name is Carolyn Bischoff, and my liaison areas are physics, astronomy, and earth sciences. I also have like a makerspace component of my job, but we're not gonna talk about that because this is Liaison Institute. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm Megan Lafferty, and I am a liaison to chemistry, chemical engineering, and materials science. I also have a component of my job that's collections coordinator for physical sciences and engineering. And as with Carolyn, not going to talk about that part. So yeah. And I think I somehow neglected to register for this whole thing, so I didn't realize till today.
We're really doing the best we can over here, just
yes.
like chugging along. So as you can see, Megan and I both STEM librarians, right? Hard sciences, primarily engineering. Our setting is the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, so it's located in Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's a big campus, and there's lots of science liaisons. Our library is huge. We have really good collegial relationships, and it's also important to note for this presentation that we are by far the largest academic library in Minnesota. So that comes into play because the science librarians at Minnesota tend to dominate the conversation when it comes to academic libraries. And I'm seeing some nods, so maybe that is a common, maybe somewhat a common occurrence for Big Ten librarians in their states. So the story for me begins in late 2020 when I attended the Midwest Data Librarian Symposium. It was held virtually. It was the first conference I'd ever attended virtually. And through a mentor matching program, I was introduced to Audrey Gunn. Hang on, let me bring up Audrey Gunn's. Where'd my mouse go? There it is. Audrey Gunn, ta-da, here she is. So she's a STEM librarian as well, natural sciences and math, as you can see here, for both St. Olaf College and Carleton College, also in Minnesota. And we were both like delighted, like refreshed to have an in-depth conversation about our STEM areas. And we were just so impressed with the symposium overall and how many people were able to join. I don't know about all of you, my main experience with virtual like conference situations were webinars. And I was like, I want no webinars ever. But this symposium like kind of changed my mind about that. I was like, there's so many people from all over the place. They had conversations. It was like such a good experience. And I don't really know how it all got started, but we ended up with an idea to organize a meetup for Minnesota STEM librarians. We were just so delighted to talk to each other. So Minnesota, there are over 60 higher ed institutions in Minnesota with librarians who support STEM fields. So hang on. There we go. Wow, list of colleges and universities in Minnesota. Guess what? It's an enormous list. Like it's huge. There's lots and lots and lots and lots. Anyways, let me go back to this. And for years, different groups have wanted to build community among science librarians in the state. I don't know what it is about science librarians. I don't know if we're just like hungry for validation that like, I don't know. It's really hard to do outreach to like STEM fields. I don't know what the thing is, but there have been lots of attempts to do this. And I really want to give a posthumous acknowledgement to Ron Joslin. I don't know if you know about him. He founded the LibTech conference. It was a conference at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he was always working on bringing people together, including science librarians in the Twin Cities. So I had him on my mind when we were organizing this. And so there were a couple of problems. And one of them was like, if we had gone through the professional organizations, the Minnesota Library Association, the Academic Libraries and Research Division, the ARLD, anyway, in that, whatever, the Academic Library Division of the Minnesota Library Association, that would only reach existing members, and physical distance was always a barrier. Like, how are we going to ask the person who lives up in, whatever, Morris, or, anywhere in Minnesota, big state, to drive all the way to probably the Twin Cities, because that's where a lot of colleges are concentrated. So to that. So what Audrey and I decided to do, which like in retrospect was kind of a crazy amount of work, but like we split it up and it was fine. We just looked up every academic librarian in the state. Like we had a couple of meetings and we sat there and we literally like Googled the library. We had the list and we Googled the library and we like community colleges, technical colleges, tribal colleges, like, university, everybody. We just like tried to find everybody we could. We made a spreadsheet and we made a Google form and we emailed everybody an invite. So we had like, the invitation was basically like, hello, we found you because you're a STEM librarian in Minnesota. If you would like us to never contact you again, please click here. And it led to a Google form that was like, please never contact me again. And then it was like, if you'd like to register for this thing, please click here. Anyway, to our immense surprise, people showed up and we had a great conversation. And then we ended up having 2 more people who were interested in helping us organize, which honestly was like one meeting. And we're like, who do we want to have a speaker? Like, what do you want to do? And then we scheduled it and sent out the email. So from here, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Megan. There have been 3 more meetups with a 4th. We're hoping to have another planned. We kind of stopped after a year because we're all just exhausted. But Megan Lafferty was one of the organizers, along with Cecilia Vetter, who was formerly of Concordia University in St. Paul, who moved on to Indiana. So I'm going to pass it to Megan, who will talk about how the meetups are actually structured.
Okay, and Carolyn, so this is just a title slide. So yeah, I just want to talk about what we were actually doing at the events and kind of like how they were, a little bit how they were organized. Let's see, where am I going with this? So this is just, this slide is like the discussion guidelines that we had set. I guess Carolyn and Audrey actually set this for the first one, and it takes a bit from some of our like our diversity workshops kind of framework that we have about like, like what we discuss here, like what we learn can leave here and what we say stays here, like specific stories that kind of like, unless you have permission to share someone's stories kind of thing. And about like the kind of stepping up if you tend to hold back in conversations and vice versa, and listening to understand. And we have been attempting to record the sessions for people who aren't able to make it, because obviously people's schedules are often not conducive to that. Have we managed to get all of them? Yes, it looks like we have. So that's good job us on that. And yeah, I mean, especially with like, I know we are so short-staffed right now, and so many of us are taking on additional roles. So it's like, there's so many reasons for people to not have capacity to do this, but still be interested. So this is a list of who we've had speaking. And I was like one of the first people who volunteered. I was like, because this is a thing that I have been interested in and just had, and I was like, oh, someone is working on this. I want to be part of this. And I can't even remember what I talked about at this point, or actually what most of these people talked about. A lot of it is just like, what are some projects you're working on right now? It's just really a chance to like start conversation about things that we're doing as STEM librarians in our Minnesota libraries. And so, could you go back slide? It's okay, thanks, Carolyn. That it's just, it's not all University of Minnesota people, which I do feel like is an achievement, although it is pretty much all Twin Cities except for the Mayo Clinic. But it's really hard given like how much the weight of population in the state is around the Twin Cities. So I mean, I know that's common with like urban areas, like for most states. So I was like, well, that's where most of the people are. And so people who are like supporting more health sciences, supporting across like all areas of science at their colleges, like Mike Bloomberg and Jennifer DeYoung, I'm not positive that's how she says her name, who are from smaller schools with smaller populations. I don't know that we've been in touch with people at corporate libraries. This was only for academic libraries. I sometimes have had contact with people through SLA, but and like,
and we kind of like had to make a choice about scoping, because like we could be looking up people for 1,000 years.
It's a lot harder to find people in corporate libraries as well, although like things like SLA and LinkedIn can help with that, but it can be a little harder to, because like academics, we're trying to like be visible to users, to potential users. And so anyway, so like a range of schools, a range of kind of like areas of support, and many of us of course have, you know, different kinds of focus in our job. Anyway, so getting discussions going, this was one of the things that, like, I mean, a lot of us did not know each other. Those of us who work together in like the University of Minnesota Twin Cities do, and the people who are involved through like organizations like MLA and things like that, there are some people who knew each other, but there were a lot of us who did not know each other. And so like getting discussions started was definitely like, that's one of the things where we've had like the most kind of feedback on that, of like, can we have some more structure to that? Could you move to the next one? Yeah, so this is just kind of like our starting point with the first one about like, you know, just kind of getting things started, asking like what areas you're in for just basic introductions. And so then we also had breakout rooms that we had people go into, and I think with the first one, people wanted, after the first one, people wanted a little more like, could we have a little more guidance on questions, just to kind of keep things from stalling out. Sometimes happens. And we tried to keep the groups not too large too, with the discussion groups. And I would say, I'm trying to think how many people we had in each of, I feel like it was on the order of like 10 to 20 per meetup.
Yeah, I think that's right, like about 20.
Yeah, something along those lines. So, and the second, let's see, can you move to the next one, Carolyn? And I say, this shows like info about those of us who were organizing it, or for organizing it for a piece of the time, but also this was something that we did, were we calling them trading cards? I think that's what we called them. Just as like, we put these slides in and had people fill them out, and then kind of, and use that as a starting discussion point. So like, as we put them into their breakout rooms, and this was just as an example to show people what we were expected. And then the next slide, Carolyn.
So Carolyn and Megan, you have about maybe a minute to wrap up.
Okay. There's not a lot more left. And then just some additional discussion questions we asked. We're just, you know, just trying to get discussion started as the real purpose. And the last slide, Carolyn. So as I mentioned before, like some most of the feedback we got was like, we want some more guidance on the breakout room questions. And for people who gave feedback on like what the highlight of it was like getting to meet and talk with other Minnesota STEM librarians. So we met our goal with that. That's really what it was about. Could you go back, Carolyn, to the slide before? The discussion questions. Yeah, so just some, you know, different ideas for discussion questions, and we'll come up with new ones for our next one. We had intended to plan something for like last October, and then I don't know, COVID life it weighs on us. So anyway, so we're intending to keep going with this, and it's been a good way to like try and build some connections between STEM librarians in the state.
Well, thank you both so much. This is great. The amount of work that must have went into that is enormous. There are some comments in the chat. Deborah Margolis is asking, can you show the second to the last slide, please, again? Oh, you already did that. And are there any plans to expand the meetup, maybe to Iowa?
I think we had been calling it, we're calling it Minnesota Plus at some point.
Yeah.
We often include the Dakotas because they're like not a ton of academic libraries there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, if you want to come, here's our website. Like, there's a little link at the bottom that's like, do you want to come?
Yeah.
Here's how you get the email from us. Like, we'll put you on the spreadsheet. We did, so there's like a library network. I can never describe what Minitex is. Like, I can try and I will never be able to do it. Minitex is like a big cooperative network of libraries and like resource sharing in Minnesota, but it also covers the Dakotas. So we actually sent out a note about the last meetup almost a year ago now in the Minitex Messenger. And so when we did that, we were like, let's call it the Min Plus STEM meetup, because that will get people from North Dakota and South Dakota as well. But if there's anyone here who wants to join, there's a link at the bottom of the page, and just fill out the Google form, and then you can decide if you want to come when you get an invite.
And I believe Carolyn just dropped in the chat the URL where people can sign up to, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
The recordings are there too, and you know, the resources and the people.
So Deborah, you had a question.
Yeah, hi. It was a question about the icebreakers. Oh, you didn't use icebreakers. They were like all library STEM icebreakers. Did you consider using non-library STEM icebreakers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
did you though?
Huh?
Did you use them? Like I didn't see
don't know
them
that we
listed.
have yet, but
I can't even remember, honestly. Like, what
there's
did
a
we
lot-
even talk about in the first one?
yeah, I know there's a lot that's fuzzy. A lot of it was just like kind of introduce yourself and what areas you work with and who you work with and that kind of thing. Just kind of-
Okay.
Yeah,
I
but
just-
it wasn't
I-
like super formal. We were trying to keep it light. So like,
Yeah.
yeah. I have a feeling at the next one, we will definitely be using non-STEM icebreakers because
Okay, maybe something about the composition of different ice creams. Just kidding.
I would definitely be. I mean, I am a chemistry librarian, so I mean, it relates to so many kinds of science, really. So I can tie just about anything to science.
Okay,
Thank you.
and there is also this point that there used to be a discussion list for BTAA librarians for engineering and for chemistry, and people would like to resurrect them. So
Well, that's me saying that.
oh,
That's me
that-
saying
that you
yes.
said that.
I was like,
Okay,
let's
sorry.
do
I was
that.
just-
I would like to connect with other like STEM-ish, like STEM health science. I don't know. Sometimes health sciences people are like, I'm not really STEM, but I'm like, I see it as STEM. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to break this conversation and go on.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Cindy Frank, architecture librarian at the University of Maryland, and she will be talking about diversifying the architecture collections during the quarantine and after. Okay, Cindy, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am not using slides, so I'm just going to chat, and hopefully you'll have some questions for me. I'm going to discuss my process for both keeping my students employed at the beginning of the pandemic and attempting to diversify my architecture image and book collections. So the libraries here at Maryland mandated that we try and keep our students employed as much as possible when we first went home, so we could continue paying them. Yeah, no slides. And I took that to heart and looked at this time as an opportunity to really build our image collection from a diversity point of view. I will repeat my colleague Emily Matthews' question: how do libraries reflect the communities they serve? So the University of Maryland, like most of our Big Ten schools, is a public university. And we are in the undergraduate student profile. We are 45% white. We are 47% US minorities. And the architecture program really reflects that. If you look downstairs in where the studios are. I'm lucky my branch library is in the School of Architecture. So I asked two of the graduate student employees who were working with me to do some research, and I asked them to look for architects of color. And we went to the Google spreadsheet, was awesome. And the goal was to build a list of architects and architecture firms, when they're practicing, find some buildings, and then search through the Avery Index to Architectural Periodicals, Academic Search Ultimate, WorldCat, and find books and journal articles that would have documentation of architects of color. And then we could scan images and upload those images into ArtStore. The University of Maryland subscribes to ArtStore and JSTOR. And as such, we can add images and the data that goes with that. I was going into the library once a week. I would check that spreadsheet for the citations, go find the things and scan them. And then my students also through Google Drive would enter all the data and publish these things to ArtStore. It's really, really difficult to find published work of architects of color in the United States. Number one, there are not that many, which is a reflection on the profession. So we expanded the list to global architects, and that actually was much easier to find documentation of. And just to sort of throw out a depressing statistic, in the US, there are 122,000 licensed architects. Of that, 500 are Black women licensed architects. And so anyway, that's kind of shameful. So then I pivoted. While my students were, finding architects globally for me to, find images, plans, elevations, all that good stuff, I started being much more careful about my shopping. And so I started looking at the authors of books. Are they, younger colleagues at other architecture schools? Like, who am I supporting? Who am I giving voice to? In the meantime, like all of us, I get emails directly from publishers. And one publisher is telling me about a republished monograph about the work of Lou Kahn. So Lou Kahn was a white male architect who lived in Philadelphia. In the architecture world, he's kind of a big shot. I already own 95 books by or about Lou Kahn. And so I already owned the original version of this reprinted book. So I am not interested in buying another book about Lou Kahn. I also decided to write back to a particular publisher, and I'll just read what I wrote. They were like, please buy our book, Urban Transects. It's really great. And I said, dear Oro, it was the Oro editions, dear Oro edition editors, do you have any books or ebooks in your catalog that feature an architect or practice where the principals are people of color? I manage an architecture library, and the architecture school's focus has taken a shift away from white European male architects to teach broader architectural history. What do you have for me? So I did get a response. Cindy, thanks for your note. We're working on such a book now. Stay tuned, Gigi. Gigi is Gordon Goff. So apparently one book is gonna just meet all the needs. I just can't wait to get that one book, which I have not heard about yet. So what's next? I'm going to continue to aggravate the publishers. I am working with other librarians. I happen to be a member of the Association of Architecture School Librarians. And at our recent conference, we started talking about putting our disparate efforts together to build an archive, which would hopefully include some oral histories. I would recommend something, if you're interested in this, some students at the Rhode Island School of Design put together a website called projectarchive.info. It's .info, which really does present a much broader work of architecture. And I've been taking a page out of my colleague Jody Coulter's book, who you're going to hear from her shortly, right? And I really am encouraging critical citation work when I do my library instruction. Just sort of reminding folks that, pay attention to who you cite, pay attention to the buildings you look at as precedent studies. So that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm wondering if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, Jody, just one book. That should cover it.
Okay. Then we're moving on, and our next speakers are Kate Peterson, undergraduate services librarian, and Kimberly Clark, social sciences librarian at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And they're going to be talking about using trauma-informed teaching to support the whole student. So Kate, you can take it over.
Thank you. Cindy, I super appreciated having no slides. And now we're going to go back to slides. So let me see. Sorry, one moment. All right, there is a link to the slides on this slide, and then I also just put one into the chat as well. So we are excited, Kim and I are excited to be here to talk briefly about this topic that we're very passionate about. So there are 4 members of our team that Kim and I are sort of representing today. So my name is Kate Peterson. I'm the undergraduate services librarian at the University of Minnesota. And Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you for a brief introduction.
Okay, hi, my name is Kimberly Clark, and I just realized that a little bit ago, my email on this presentation was wrong, but I fixed it. So I'm a social sciences librarian, and we just took these pictures with our beloved furred folks in our lives.
And when I read that phrase, the new normal, definitely one thing that we are all familiar with is this idea of, again, Zoom and all these boxes and stuff. So this really became our new normal. Our team, who worked on a lot of different things, including this topic, working and laughing together. And so it really did become our new normal. So what we're going to briefly talk about today are some concepts or some things that we learned about in spring 2020 when the pandemic was still very new, and things that we used that informed our work since that time, but that they have continued to be very helpful. So this is a quick interactive question. What is one word that describes your experience with spring? Again, teaching. Teaching can mean lots of different things, so think very broadly about teaching. So what's one word to describe your spring teaching experience? I'm going to pause for 30 seconds to let everybody find their chat.
So people saying flexible, busy, classroom scattered, running on fumes, more.
Yes, we can definitely all understand that. So there's definitely also continues to be more conversations. I suspect many of you saw the number of articles that were talking about the student disengagement and the continued impact of the pandemic for all sorts of various reasons, plus all the other things that are going on in this world and things that are going on today as we think about current events. So we want to talk a little bit about being trauma informed. And this is something, of course, we could talk about for a lot longer than the time we're allotted. So think about this as a taste and that we just want to share our experience with this, but know that there's a lot more about it. So our group got a brief introduction to the idea of the concept of trauma informed teaching during Welcome Week. So that was something we have on our campus for orientation. And in April of 2020, we were trying to figure out as a campus about what would Welcome Week look like in September 2020. So the mental health services staff shared that they were talking with students that they were talking with about the pandemic as a collective trauma for students and staff and faculty. And at that point, that was sort of a newer concept for us, or certainly for me, I can speak to. And we were they shared some of this great work about trauma-informed pedagogy from Maisie Med, and there's other experts out there who have been talking about this for a long time. But it was the introduction that we needed at that moment in time, and we're really able to use some of these concepts in our decision-making in April and May and June and July and August, when there was so much uncertainty. It felt like a very helpful way to say, how are we going to do this thing? Let's try this. Let's use these principles and try it this way. And it just turned out to be a very helpful frame at that particular moment in time. And the idea, Kim's going to talk more about specifically about what trauma-informed teaching can be, but it also has lots of other names or connections, things like universal design, things like critical pedagogy, things like culturally responsive pedagogy, learning theory, all sorts of things like that. So we are not trying to sell this as something brand new you all have never heard of, but just the way it is sort of put together, at least again, was new for us in April 2020. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim now.
Thanks. I'm glad that you brought that up, Kate. I say this later on, but I really like this concept. Oh, next slide. Because it really gives me a framework and a language to kind of talk about some of the stuff that I may have already done in the past. So COVID has made things really hard in many, many ways. And I think in addition to COVID, we also have these other sorts of pandemics happening. My mind right now is reflecting on Texas and other places recently that have dealt with some big issues in the last 10 days. So we're just living in this soup with a lot of uncertainty, and humans aren't meant to live in such a state of ambiguity long term. So this is just really hard. Next slide. So before we talk more specifically about the trauma-informed approach and teaching, I wanted to just remind us a little bit about the connection between fear and learning. Think about the time, probably a little while from now, for me, it's probably 3 or more years, where you were in the most optimal learning environment for you. Okay, so now we got that picture. Now think about learning that same thing right now. It's gonna be kind of like an S show, right? It's gonna be really hard. So fear, and then by extension trauma, is an obstacle to learning and growing. And learners who have experienced trauma have these few characteristics. They might have problems with learning new information, retaining old information. They may have problems showing up or being present in class. Completing tasks are difficult, and they are constantly scanning their landscape to anticipate the next threat. So in that stew, it's really hard to let new things in, or other things like joy, happiness. Next slide, please. So I think that thinking about taking a trauma-informed approach to librarianship is a really great idea, and it has 2 parts. I'm just going to kind of describe this really fast, but you have the bigger definition there. So we want to encourage people to have the understanding that the folks that we interact with, colleagues, students, faculty, and staff, have all experienced some measure of trauma. And then we want to use that understanding to create or recreate policies and practices to increase accessibility, learning, and growth. Studies have shown prior to the pandemic that 85% of college students before they enter college have said that they have experienced some traumatic event in their lives. And then when they're in college, another 25% say that they have experienced things while they're in the college setting. So we are all traumatized in all ways. I mean, this isn't an oppression Olympics, but we are. I really love this concept of a trauma-informed approach to librarianship. And it really has invigorated my work in a lot of ways. And again, as I said earlier, having a language and principles to help us think about this more holistically has really been really helpful. It's all about, at its most essential, opening windows and doors and making pathways to make things more possible for learning and growth. Now, I do want to say, because this has come up a couple of times when we've presented before, people might be a little hesitant or reluctant to think about using this approach because it may seem like we're encouraging people to be therapists, counselors. Well, actually, we probably are all of those already. I know I've had a couple students cry on me. We're not encouraging that. That's not what this is, because working at a higher education institution, I'm sure we all have access to health centers, therapists, advisors to send those students when we feel like they need a referral. So this is more about looking at our context as library workers and figuring out how we can best meet the needs of our students and the rest of our college community. Next slide, please. So this is another fun chat. How does trauma affect a library or learning environment? So we'll give a little space for that for you to respond. How doesn't it? So true. Burnout, yeah. Trust, that's true. And attention, yeah, it's a struggle. We're seeing it. Classroom stress, yes, that's for sure. Oh, yeah. Oh, we wish we could have you for an hour to talk about just that part. So next slide, please. So what does trauma-informed teaching look like? And I have a plus at the end because, as Kate was saying earlier, teaching can look in lots of different ways. It could be you at a service desk, you on chat, you doing one-on-one consults, you teaching classes, you cataloging something so people can find it more easily in your system. It can look a lot of different ways. But from the way that we're looking at it, these are some things that we have tried to use and put into place. I'm going to have you just kind of notice the list, and I will talk about the things that have resonated with me. I've really enjoyed using offering choices and using this idea of radical hospitality and creating community. In the past, small talk has been kind of a boring thing for me to do. I never know really what to say. But I would always start my one-on-one consultations with like a, how are you doing? Now I see that I can use that time to really just kind of be vulnerable with my student and just, really say, yeah, this is a hard time that we're having. Let's just kind of face that cat in the room and just name it. And then try to have a good exchange, good communication while we're in this space together. And I find that it's really rewarding for the students. They immediately start to relax. Their ears were like up by their shoulders and now they're down where they're supposed to be. There's a palpable positive energy shift there. So think about all of these other things in the list that I'm not going to talk about. I'm going to switch it back to Kate.
All right, thank you, Kim. So we've just provided some examples, and again, you all have the slides. You can go and look at some of these things, but of ways that we were trying to use the trauma-informed approach to some of the work that we've done in the last couple of years. For example, we had a face-to-face workshop called Think Like a Researcher for first and second year students to get them thinking about how to get involved with undergraduate research. And we shifted it to basically an asynchronous mini Canvas to really just give students a lot of flexibility about when they were going to be able to do their work. We recorded even some pretty simple things like some encouraging messages that we were able to put on social media from a number of our different staff. We also then had to kind of reintroduce our buildings to our users because our buildings have been closed. So we went to try things like self-guided tours, which we hadn't done before. We offered a lot of sort of Zoom workshops. We realized kind of relatively early in the pandemic that students seemed to be hungry for a very short format Zoom. I mean, we know everybody's tired of Zoom, so I'm not saying that we changed that, but that they were interested in making connections with staff and each other around a lot of academic concepts. So we really just tried to figure out how we could kind of tap into that. So here are some examples of those. With our first year experience course, they used to sort of tour the library. We had a crazy tour week where we would have hundreds of students come through and sort of tour. And we really wanted to try to think about a new way to do that versus just record a video. And so used our ebook platform here, Pressbooks, to create a choose your own adventure library, go for library adventure. So feel free to look at that as an example of, again, taking a lot of these principles and try to sort of applying them in this short format way. So it really, using this, as Kim said, as a framework, it helped us to be more intentional. We made things that we could easily repurpose and reuse. We adapted to not knowing, and for a long time we were waiting to do things, but we just said, no, we can't wait anymore. We just need to go. We got a lot faster at making videos and captionings. I suspect a lot of you did that as well. And we really also continue to this time to figure out how to simplify our messages, focusing on the short-term needs of our students and keep it really short. So there are additional resources here that please take advantage of as you would like to. Lots of really good stuff has now been written about this, and again, before the pandemic and things like that. And a lot of more people are applying it to the library situation as well. And then we just have a quote. So that is our last slide.
Well, thank you both so much. This is so timely. We're all struggling with that, and we all feel so terrible for the students. Although I think by the end of the spring semester, I think there is a lot of students who kind of felt a little better, you know, being on campus and being in their communities. So hopefully things will also improve. I wonder if there are questions or comments. And I know it's a long day. We have one more speaker, and then we can adjourn. Well, so since I don't see anything except for thank yous, I'm gonna move on to Jody Coulter, who is Life Sciences and Outreach Librarian at the University of Maryland. And she will be talking about citation justice in the classroom, teaching to cite diverse voices.
Okay. And please feel free to like interrupt me. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, anything like that. So yeah, and Yelena, just so that you know, I go right up to like 10 minutes, but I promise I only go like a couple seconds over. My name is Jody Coulter. I'm the Life Sciences and Outreach Librarian at the University of Maryland. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about citation justice in the classroom and what that looks like. The pandemic was honestly very fruitful for me. It allowed me to take a lot of courses on a whole bunch of different just concepts that I was hoping to like learn more about in equity, diversity, inclusion. And it also gave the university, I think, a lot of time to sort of readjust and focus some of their objectives on diversity education. We got a new university president. One of his strategic plans was incorporating more diversity into education. So I had a lot of faculty coming to me at the time saying, hey, what resources does the library have? What can you do for us? How can we find diverse voices? So I put together these modules, these workshops, these one-off courses, and yeah, that's where this sort of came from. I do want to acknowledge that, you know, while the modules are my own, there's a lot of concepts here that are not mine. And I want to recognize the fact that these come from a whole bunch of different other people in the world. Cite Black Women Period and Cite Black Women Collective in particular was a huge inspiration for me throughout the pandemic. Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, who I'll talk a little bit about later, Rigoberto Lara Guzman, Jordan Dworkin, who runs sort of like a bibliometric lab in neurosciences. Their work was very informative, and Danny Bassett and Perry Zern, all of these folks contributed to what I'm going to talk about today. So what is it? What is citation justice? Well, citation justice is the act of citing authors based on identity or their position in society to uplift marginalized voices. So this might mean citing Black, Brown, or Indigenous folks more. It might mean citing women more. Just a whole bunch of different identities, citing those more over our white male counterparts. One of the best examples I've seen of citation justice is from the book Data Feminism, written by D'Ignazio and Klein. And it's a book, so I think that might be why it's such a good example, because they had a whole bunch of metrics on racism, patriarchy, ableism, classism. That's just a sampling of all of the things that they tried to account for in their book. They had pages of tables about their aspirational metrics, how they wanted to cite, who they wanted to cite. And then they had a whole bunch of like their draft metrics and then their final metrics. So once the book was published, what did the metrics actually look like? What's really interesting about this particular example is that the difference between draft metrics and final metrics was stark. I can't remember 100%, but I'm pretty sure they didn't hit any of their aspirational metrics. They came close to a few, but I don't think they actually got to, say, 75% of citations from people of color. But they did come pretty close. But after they went through an open peer review, they got a whole bunch of feedback that said, why aren't you citing this person? Why wasn't this example used? And it was almost all white men. So their metrics actually decreased as they went along, which was interesting and maybe deserves some further study later. So one of the biggest questions I get when I teach this is, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to cite based on content, regardless of creator identity? And to that, I say, yes, of course, of course you're supposed to cite on content, but there is a growing body of evidence across multiple disciplines that women, Black, brown, people of color are all cited less frequently than their white male counterparts. And that's true regardless of what is actually what the composition of that field looks like. So if a field like librarianship, for example, has many white women, we're still citing white men more often. And there's actually, I'll get into this a little bit later, but there was a Nature news article that was published recently that suggested that librarians are actually citing Black women more often, but it wasn't taking into account our actual composition, like who's actually in here in librarianship, I mean. So for example, communications, neuroscience, anthropology, data science, engineering, all of these fields have published bibliometric analyses that suggest that this is happening. So this is true across, and this is just a small portion, there's a lot more. Oh no, the slides are not advancing.
No, and
hold on, let me see if I can do this differently. Oh, now they are. Okay. All right, we'll see if we can. Okay, the link works. Okay, thank you so much, Dee. Hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing now. So sorry about that. I have no idea why that's happening. But yeah, so this is happening across multiple different areas. And one thing I tell them, folks, is that if you don't find a bibliometric analysis in your particular field, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not happening in your field. This might mean that, nobody has had the time or the inclination to actually do the bibliometric analyses. So this is something that we look at, and just being aware that this is becoming a thing throughout multiple different fields. So this is a case study that we actually look at fairly regularly. This was from Dworkin and the whole lab that took a look at some of these citations in neuroscience. So it's looking at 270,000 citations. It's looking at the first author and the last author. And when the first author and last author are both men, they tend to be oversighted. When they're both women, they tend to be significantly undercited. And when they tend to be a mix, they land right in the middle. And you can actually see that this is getting worse. I have some theories about why this might be happening. Maybe it has to do with the citation stream. So as you get cited, you are cited more, kind of a thing. So this is something that we do take a look at, but it's a really good example of what's happening. Okay. So what are the ramifications of this? Well, there are obviously systemic issues, especially in the sciences, which I work in mostly. There's a lot that rides on promotion and tenure, for example. So the more someone is cited, the more likely they are to get promotion and tenure. This in turn leads into differences in pay, and it also can contribute to these populations leaving academia. In the long term, there are lots of different failures that include fewer, BIPOC and women folk in the classroom. This in turn can lead to less diverse student bodies. Students tend to gravitate to where they see themselves reflected. If they don't see themselves in the classroom, they're not going to come to your school. So this is a long-term failure, basically in just up and down academia, like all over the place. So what did we do? Well, we took a couple of different approaches on how we sort of taught this. For freshmen and juniors, my colleague Susie Wilson and I, who I don't think is on the talk right now, but we talk about how and why to cite. We start there. We start with an activity where we actually create a citation format in the classroom based on DC murals. So they tell us what they want to cite. A lot of times that includes artists, medium, the intersection where these murals take place, a number of different things. But basically, we just say, hey, this is why you want to cite. This is the importance. Inevitably, the artist almost always comes first in their format. And so we talk about that. Why is the artist first? Why is it important to cite the artist first? And that inevitably leads to a discussion on who you are citing. For juniors and seniors, we're building up the practice. We're talking about keeping track of citations and keeping track of those diverse voices. So we use tags in Zotero, for example. We talk about how to find diverse voices. So I take them to a research guide and we talk about that a little bit. For master's students, we actually start auditing. So they may have a final research paper and we audit their citations based on some code that we have, or just literally based on like handwriting, this person is who I'm citing. For PhDs, we're looking for a much more complete practice and basically to spread the word. So we encourage PhDs to write diversity statements. These statements can be published in an article that says, hey, this is how we looked at diversity. This is how we took diverse citations into account. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, honestly. It's like throughout the whole process, it's a great time. We also talk about finding diverse voices. So please feel free to visit the research guide that I put together. This is definitely a work in progress. I'm constantly adding to it. I'm constantly taking away as I find more resources. But this is sort of like the crux of what I teach from. Cite Black authors. This is actually a database where researchers can basically self-identify themselves and say, hey, I work in this field, please cite me. Cite Black authors is fantastic. If you have one resource that talks about different voices in your field, please by all means check them out. The 500 women scientists, oh, thank you, Cindy. 500 women scientists is exactly what it sounds like. It's 500 women scientists who are basically identified. You can follow them, all of that good stuff. And social media. So social media is like huge, especially if you're looking to, for example, if you're looking to cite more LGBTQ+ people, you want to depend on how they're actually identifying themselves. So social media is actually a huge resource out there. There's a very, very robust science Twitter, very robust science Instagram. Oh, yes, exactly. There's another one, 500 queer scientists. Yes, for sure. And social media is just fantastic for identifying things. If you don't have social media, LinkedIn, also another very, very good resource for finding diverse voices. And then of course, I suggest that they talk to their subject specialist at the end, for sure. So one of the things that I also always mention is that we are all learning. I am constantly learning new things about this, and I am trying to keep up to date with how people want to be cited, if they want to be cited, and what that means. So we are all learning. There's always more capacity to learn. There's always more capacity to spread the knowledge. So that's something I do want to acknowledge. And I'm going to leave you with this quote, and I recognize that it's a little weird as a white woman to be reading this, but I think that the sentiment is very, very important. It's simple. Cite Black women. Black women have been producing knowledge since we bless this earth. We theorize, we innovate, we revolutionize the world. We do not need mediators. We do not need interpreters. And this came from the Cite Black Women Collective, from the work that they've been doing. And I think that it is very important to acknowledge that they don't. We just need to cite them. We need to read their work and we need to cite them. And I think, yeah, oops, sorry, that's it. And that's not the correct slides. I'm sorry, I reused the slides.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our speakers. I think everything was so engaging and close to heart, and something that we all share into, and which is like really great to hear that we all kind of in the same soup, you know, in a way. So thank you all very much. Those who presented with slides, please send them to me. We will try to put them along with the recording so that for future references. There were a lot of citations and URLs listed there, so it will be beneficial for all of us to have in the future as well. We came to the end of the program today. There is another part of this program tomorrow, also at 2 o'clock. I just hope to make sure that everybody registered for that program separately. We have some changes in personnel, and so this is the way we were able to handle it this time. So I hope to see you all tomorrow as well. I just want to, since we have a little bit of a time, like we have maybe 10 minutes, if there are any questions, final remarks, if anybody would like to say something, this is our opportunity to hear from you. So, and I'm gonna give a minute maybe. And not seeing anything. So have a wonderful evening, everyone. I hope you have nice